Whether it's in the world of fashion or filmmaking or anything else for that matter, no one likes a played out trend. First, cargo pockets were banned, and now they're back on again. Then crew socks were for dorks, and now TikTok has declared that ankle socks are for old people. Just tell me what you want from me, world. But when it comes to filmmaking in 2024, there are a few trends that I think have been more than overplayed, and it's time to move on if you don't want your films to feel dated and gimmicky. So let's dive into 6 of what I think are the most played out trends right now, and how you can learn to avoid them. All trends, no matter what industry we're talking about, they all sort of follow the same life cycle. Someone cool or smart does something new, and then a bunch of other people copy them, and before long, everybody's doing it, and it's not cool or smart anymore. Sometimes these trends just sort of fade away, and other times they get so overused that if you stick with them for too long, people get straight up mad. Like, how many of you would click off immediately if, surprise, this was actually a why I'm quitting YouTube video? I'm guessing quite a few, followed by a ton of negative comments about how sick everyone is of these videos. And over the last 10 plus years of working as a documentary cinematographer and director, I've seen quite a few trends come and go. Remember when hyperlapses were like the coolest thing ever?
What? No!
Well, me neither really, but that didn't stop everyone from making them for a bit. As always, these opinions are my own, and if you disagree, then just keep doing your thing, please. But if you're still with me, here's what's been triggering me in 2024 as I sit here in my ankle socks and feel old. The first one on this list is probably my most hated trend out there these days, and it's especially unforgivable if you're shooting documentaries. Now, social media is really to blame for this one, but that hasn't stopped this trend from creeping into more serious filmmaking, and it honestly drives me crazy. Let me give you a personal example. So a few months ago, I was filming a feature doc in Arizona, and one of our main characters was taking part in an activity that drew in a bunch of media who weren't part of our crew. I'm being a little vague, I can't say much more about it until the film comes out next year, but basically there were other people with cameras there that I had to shoot around. And that's not really an issue because I know everyone's just trying to shoot and do their thing, and that's cool. Until we had to shoot a night scene, that is. And as I was looking at my monitor, I noticed this blinking green light on the main character's chest. It took me a second to figure out what was happening, but eventually I realized that one of the journalists had clipped one of those DJI mics to the outside of our guy's chest, and I had to take a couple deep breaths to stop myself from yelling. I mean, come on, get that thing out of the shot. Who wants to see that? And if you haven't already guessed, this is the first trend I absolutely want to see die as soon as possible, because nothing breaks the illusion of reality like a big old mic clipped to someone's shirt or hat or whatever. It might work for Sam Sulek in the gym, but in my opinion, visible mics have no place in your documentary unless you're doing a straight up press conference. The point of docs, or all films really I guess, is to immerse an audience in a story, and nothing will ruin that immersion faster than a big chunk of plastic and flashing lights. I sort of feel like Grandpa Simpson, you know, shouting at the clouds in that meme. Oh, it's laughing now! But please just hide your mics, it's the worst. Now, if I haven't already made enough enemies with that hot take, I'm sure this next one will, because this is one trend I feel like I've seen in every single cinematography reel over the last couple of years. And before I come off as too harsh, I do get why people like this, because after all, trends start because people want to copy something that's genuinely cool, and this is cool. But once everyone is doing it, it's no longer unique, and its coolness starts to fade pretty quick. And for me anyways, that's especially true for this next trend because I can't seem to get away from it, and that's the boxing gym tube light sequence. I'm not talking about just any scene filmed with a boxer here. I'm talking about one particular sequence that had some very distinct features that's been done to death over the last year. Maybe you've seen it too. The shot I'm talking about here is always dark. The gym needs to be very dark to enhance the moodiness, even though I'm pretty sure most athletes generally train in the day unless it's like 5 a.m. in the winter or something. Next, you're gonna put some strong overhead light, probably some pavo tubes, maybe in shades of orange and blue or pink and green, because why own RGB lights if you're not using all those diodes? The shooting angle here always seems to be pointing up, and there is a liberal use of 120 FPS to make sure we know just how dramatic it is. Okay, so I'll stop there, and I'm sorry if that got a little personal, because all jokes aside, I really do get it. Shooting boxing gyms this way is a really visual setup, and it's a fun way to practice lighting with a dynamic subject. It just looks cool, and I guess that's probably why 70% of the reels I see these days seem to have one of these setups in them. But for me, unless you're actually making a sports film in in which case ignore me completely, this trend is played out. Mainly it's because pretty much all of these shots look exactly the same, and so when they pop up, I immediately just lump that filmmaker in with everyone else who has the same thing in their reel. So my point isn't to discourage anyone from experimenting or practicing, and there's no doubt that this boxing gym tube light setup is stylish, but unless that sequence goes with a real story about an athlete's life, I have to say I am over it. Not sure how many people I just alienated with that one, but if you're still with me, let's keep going. The next trend I really would love to see the back of is probably the fault of YouTube and content creation in general more than anything, so I'm sorry on behalf of YouTubers everywhere. With social media, especially short stuff like TikTok or Reels, there's often so much competition for attention that the only thing that will hold your audience is constant movement and actions that they don't even have like a millisecond's chance to get bored. There's always another video just to swipe away, so if you don't push the pace constantly, you'll lose them, which usually leads to a ton of camera movement in every shot, and it's movement that's really just there for the sake of movement. Like, you've all seen speed ramped push-ins, or how every shot seems to wrap around the subject, whatever it is, like all sped up. And that makes sense when you've got 3 seconds to impress someone, but when you're trying to slow down and tell a deeper story, it's time to be more intentional with camera movement. Now, don't get me wrong, movement is great, and you should absolutely use camera moves, but only if they make sense for your story. Like, a gentle push-in can be amazing for bringing viewers into a scene, and a pull-out can help us leave that same scene. Subtle side-to-side movement when shooting handheld can also help even out micro jitters on bigger rigs, and when I shoot handheld, I'm generally moving a tiny bit all the time. But my real beef here is when people are just moving the camera because it seems more dramatic, or like to force energy into a scene, like the real world was one of those "let me make you a free hype reel for your food truck" videos. And actually, as a viewer, if all those shots are constantly spinning around and changing distances, it's disorienting and confusing. Good filmmaking is about the tension between movement and stillness, and even insane action movies know when to hold the shot still. So for a 20-second hamburger commercial or something, then by all means, go crazy and hit those speed ramps hard. But for everyone else, let's think about why the camera is moving before we buy a one wheel and start flying all over the frame. Now I'm going to do a complete 180 and go after a trend that's almost exactly the opposite of the constant movement thing I just complained about, which just proves I'm impossible to please, I guess. As IBIS and lens stabilization get better and better, and as gimbals with massive payload capacities get cheaper and cheaper, we're really living in a golden age of steadiness. And since I just got through ranting about constant movement, you're probably asking, what could I possibly be mad about now? Which is a fair question, but again, I'm channeling my Grandpa Simpson vibes today.
Shut up!
Now, I'm a big fan of locked off shots, and I think movies shot completely off tripods have a really great old school cinematic quality that works really well, especially compared to that whole pop culture of constant movement where you just talked about. At the same time though, I love handheld coverage and the immersive feeling it creates, and almost everything I shoot personally is handheld apart from B-roll. Alright, so what the hell am I moaning about then? I guess the best way to describe this trend would be stability for tech's sake, like those films that are shot with both IBIS and lens stabilization turned on, with the camera also mounted on a gimbal. And for me, unless this look is done really, really well, I just sort of hate it. And I'm not talking about dedicated Steadicam shots that are deliberately chosen and planned. I'm talking about this tech-driven tendency to turn on every stabilization option a Sony engineer can dream up just because it's there. Because like everything in filmmaking, things need to be done with intent, not just because it's possible. Probably the easiest example of what I'm talking about would be like a real estate YouTube channel. Everything is so unnaturally smooth while constantly moving in and out, but it's also not consistently smooth, and every once in a while the gyroscopes sort of freak out and do some strange horizon tilting adjustment, or lurch off to the side in a way that's anything but organic. And just to be clear, for those kinds of channels it's totally fine, and I have been known to love a New York City penthouse tour myself. It's when this stuff starts to cross over into the doc world that I sort of have to speak up. Stability for stability's sake just doesn't add anything to a film for me, and especially in documentary, all those weird mechanical adjustments and fake floatiness of too many motors trying to just stay still at once kind of takes me out of the moment. So by all means, if you need a smooth Steadicam shot, bust out the gimbal and go hard. If you need no movement at all, then get a tripod. I'm not discouraging any tool if it helps your creative vision. But for standard handheld scenes, let's just please stop turning on every stabilized thing at the rental house just because you can. Because at the end of the day, if it's not intentional, it's not doing anything for your story. Next, I want to talk about a trend I see more and more these days when it comes to cinematography reels. This isn't exactly new because I've sort of been low-key complaining about the overuse of drones for a while, but it sometimes feels like more than half of every new reel I see these days is just made up of drone stuff. And don't get me wrong, I like drones. I'm a licensed pilot and I've owned them since the Phantom 2, and it's pretty much expected that I fly on almost every shoot, I'd say. But as the tech gets better and better, these shots lose their power to a point where getting stunning drone shots is probably one of the easiest things you can do as a filmmaker these days. Like if I forced one of my non-filmmaker buddies to learn to fly, which, let's face it, with DJI drones is really easy for anyone who's ever played a video game, and then I made them get out of bed at 6 a.m. and got them up to the top of a mountain, odds are that if they got that drone up in the air, they'd be able to get a nice looking shot. Now there's definitely exceptions to this, and a skilled drone pilot can do all sorts of moves and tracking shots that an amateur never could. But when it comes to your reel, which is the first thing so many production managers or new clients are going to see when thinking about hiring you, cramming the whole thing full of sunset aerials is going to set off alarm bells for sure, unless you're a drone pilot, that is. Okay, one or two of the best drone shots you have definitely have a place. It shows you know how to fly, and that's important on modern dock crews. But beyond that, every drone shot that follows kind of reinforces to me that you're hiding the fact that you don't have enough story-based work to show. Look, when someone is trying to hire a shooter they've never worked with, especially at the higher levels, they need to see that you can work with people, that you understand coverage and storytelling, and that you filmed actual scenes or real-world situations. Drone shots don't prove any of this. All it shows is that you have a drone and got out for nice light. So definitely don't stop flying drones. That's not what I'm saying, because I definitely don't plan to. But if you're cutting a new reel and notice that like half of it is made up of aerials, either switch out that stuff for more real coverage or get out there and film some more from the ground. Drones are great, but they do not a storyteller make.
You must feel the force around you.
Now, the last trend I'd love to see die in 2024 is kind of a weird one, and I'm not sure how it got to be the default mode for so many doc shooters out there, and it's all about interviews. Now, in my documentary cinematography course, which is opening next month, August 19th, get on the waitlist now to save 10%. A big thing we focus on in the interview unit is how your camera angles during a sit-down affect the feeling of your story. Normally, your main character angle will be shot from the front, with your subject somewhere between the right or left third of the frame and the middle. Pretty standard stuff. And then if you're lucky enough to have a second camera on hand, you can set up another angle, which will help a bunch when you're trying to edit around cuts. The problem is a lot of the internet seems to have decided that the best thing for this second angle is to be as dramatic as humanly possible, whether or not it fits with the mood of the story. Now, in the cinematography course, we go a lot more deeply into this. Waitlist, August 19th, save money. But basically, the more you move the B cam away from the A cam, so like the more and more towards a side profile of the subject you get, the more sort of closed off and dramatic the frame looks. Like, let's look at these frames from the Hulu show Captive Audience, which I've never actually seen, but it's a good example. When all you see is the dark side of a person's face, whether intentionally or not, the mood you're giving to viewers is kind of a little ominous, like unavailable and closed off, and yes, more dramatic. And that's great if that's what you want. But just because everyone on YouTube seems to be shooting like this, don't think you have to as well. It's all about intentionality, and sometimes we want to actually see into a person's eyes and like read a little bit more about what's happening on their face instead of looking into their cheeks dramatically. Now let's look at this other frame from an interview with the actor James Caviezel. Sorry if I messed up his name, but he's from The Sound of Freedom, and you can see here that the B-cam angle is much more frontal than in the other examples. We can clearly see both of his eyes, and we can read the expression on his face a lot easier. And a lot of the time, that's probably going to work better than like a hard profile. And I wouldn't say this angle is any less dramatic either, it's just that the subject comes off as more open. Neither way is wrong, and I've seen incredible examples of B-cam shots from all points of the compass, including from behind. Whatever angle you pick is completely up to your creativity and what you're trying to communicate with the story, but so many times these days, it seems like a filmmaker will send me a short doc about, I don't know, a rock climber talking about their love for the sport, and the interview frame ends up being so sidey and closed off, it makes me feel like we're talking about their darkest secrets or some childhood trauma instead of the joys of their sport. Good filmmaking isn't about making things dramatic just for the sake of it, it's about communicating a story visually. So don't just do things because someone on a YouTube tutorial did it a few years ago, do it because you meant to. So there we go, my annual list of trends I'd love to ditch, 2024 edition. I'm guessing I made at least a couple people mad with that one, but such is life on the internet.
Hey man,
you!
My aim here isn't to shame anyone, it's just to point out a few of the overplayed trends out there to help you think differently about your own work. If any of these things work for your story, ignore all of this, please. But maybe, just maybe, you'll realize you've been doing a few of these things yourself without thinking about it. And don't forget to check out the cinematography course and jump on the waitlist to get a nice early bird discount like I mentioned, because it's not going to open again until next year. See ya.
Whoop.